Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today to talk about AI in education. I'm just going to introduce ourselves so that, just in case we haven't met, I know we've met a lot of you before, but my name is Gareth Randall, and I'm the academic director here at Little Mountain. And this is James Dibb. He's one of the lead teachers of the academic reading and writing streams here at Little Mountain. And we're going to be talking to you today about AI in education. We're going to talk about benefits, risks, and responsible use of AI in terms of education. Just before we kind of get started, we're going to talk to you a little bit about Zoom and some features that might be useful just during this meeting. So James is just going to take you through that before we get going.
Hey, so yeah, just a couple of things to talk about before we get into the content of the workshop. First of all, there is a question and answer section at the end. We'll have the chat open so that you can be posting questions throughout the workshop. And if we've not answered any of these questions throughout the workshop, then we'll try and get to those questions as well. We also sent out a survey before this workshop, and there's some really great questions from that too. So we'll get to those at the end as well. Now, just a second point, we're actually using translated captions for this workshop. So hopefully you'll be able to enable this translation. So if you go into the Zoom bar at the bottom, you should see either show captions or the option to press more. And then you can go in and enable the translation and change the language, your caption language, to a language of your choice. So if you enable that, you should have live translated captions for you to listen to the workshop. But this might not be very useful if you do need the translation. So Kong's going to help and just explain that again, so hopefully more people can use the translated captions.
在这里，因为我们这个时间比较紧张，所以我们不会提供每一句每一句的这种人工翻译，但同时呢，我们启用了 Zoom 的这个现场实时翻译功能。这个功能呢，如果说大家需要中文翻译的话，可以在您的 Zoom 这个会议的下面这个横条的这个 bar 这个工具栏里面您可能能看到一个就是 more， 就是更多选项。以及这么一个按钮，或者你也可能直接就看到一个 caption 的这么一个按钮。进去这个 caption 的按钮里边呢，其中第二项呢是翻译功能，请您点开这个翻译功能，然后就可以直接兑换您希望使用的语言。您可以把老师说的语言呢，我们这边就是英语，您可以根据老师说的英语来转换成中文。这样的话呢，您可以在屏幕的下端实时的收到老师的翻译。再提醒一下，我们这个课程不提供实时的人工翻译，我们使用Zoom 的这个自动实时翻译功能。同时呢，如果您有任何问题，也可以用我们的这个 Chat 这个聊天这个功能，您可以把您的问题写在这上面。我们这个讲座的准备呢，也采用了之前我们发过的一个调查问卷，关于家长关于这个 AI 这方面的一些需求和一些知识体系的一些获取。所以呢，咱们可以就是在问题上，在这个 Chat 上面来进行一些反馈。我们有时间的话，也会在这个讲座的最后阶段给大家进行答疑。如果没有时间的话，我们也会稍后联系到家长给您具体的答疑。好，那谢谢。
Okay, so just in case you're new to us at Little Mountain, or maybe you don't really know about what we do here, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the kind of classes that we hold here at Little Mountain. So generally, we have three different types of classes. Just before we move on to the AI side of things, I'm just going to introduce our school to you, so you have a bit of an idea about who we are and where we're coming from in terms of education. So we have three main areas of our classes. First of all, we have learning to read and write. Now, this is for our youngest learners. They're focused on phonics and are aiming to become independent readers and spellers. Then we also have academic reading and writing streams that are grade leveled for each grade between 1 and 12. And those are for students who are working at or above their actual grade level and would like to focus on their academic writing and also their reading comprehension. Then we also have an ESL stream called Fish, which is for students who are working, who are in the grade levels kind of 3 to 12. And they might be newer to learning English, or they might be aiming to close the gap between where they're currently working and their actual grade level. And the aim really is to have students in Fish close the gap between their grade level and their working level so that they can then be moved into one of our academic reading and writing streams. Students can also come for additional sessions. Maybe they need something else that they need a little bit of a boost on through our study hub or homework scholar offerings. And then we also have math sessions for small group math tutoring. And we have our classes also running in the Asian time zone for students who are in those time zones and would like to also join our early reading and phonics classes and our academic reading and writing classes too. And then we also have speciality programs for families that would find it useful. So admission services for private schools. If students are going through the SSAT process, then we also have preparation courses for those. We also have Speak Up, which is for students who would like to really focus on their speaking in a one-to-one setting, which is particularly useful for students who are also in our Fish stream. So this is just a bit of an overview about the different programs that we run here at Little Mountain every week. And with that said, I'm the academic director, so I kind of look after all of the classes. And James here is the lead teacher for the academic reading and writing streams, which we kind of feel is most relevant to this AI conversation today, because these are the kind of grade levels where students are coming to us with questions and comments about AI. So let's move on to that now. So today, we're going to concentrate on these areas while we're talking about AI. So first of all, we're going to just make sure that we're all of a similar understanding of AI. Then we'll move on to talk about the benefits and opportunities of AI in an education setting. We'll then move on to kind of the risks and concerns, the challenges we have around students using artificial intelligence. We'll provide some kind of advice and comments about how to use AI responsibly with school-age children. And we'll have a section for some questions and answers. And actually, we did a little survey prior to this workshop, and we got some really good questions that we've kind of incorporated into this presentation today, but there's also a chance for us to come back to those in the question and answer section. And then it'll be time to wrap up and look at what's coming up next. So I think we'll get started on why we're holding this workshop.
Okay, so over the last few months, especially us as teachers in parent-teacher meetings and also the counselors as well have had a lot of concerns from parents. Parents who are worried that AI is becoming a big part of, well, everyone's life, really. And with that comes a big part in education and learning. And parents are obviously concerned, and I don't think that's any wonder. When you look at some of the statistics around AI in education, you'll see that a huge number of students are using ChatGPT and similar tools in their work. You see 89% of students report using ChatGPT for homework. That's at higher education level. And 62% of academic institutions plan to implement AI in their processes within the next 2 years. So these are huge statistics. Now, there is a lot going around about AI, and a lot of it is not necessarily in the realm of education. A lot of it is quite hyperbolic and inflated. Now, what I want to do as educators, of course, we're not at the forefront of AI technology and development, but we are seeing AI and the impact that it's having on our students and on the learning of our students, especially. So what we want to do today is offer a realistic perspective of AI in education. And it's very much grounded in the experiences that we've had as teachers, and we want to try to look at the impact that AI is having on students today. I think it's quite clear that we don't really know where AI is going, so all we can really handle is the day-to-day. So we're trying to make sure that our students are using AI in an appropriate manner and instead of planning for a future that we don't really know just yet, we want to look at what AI means today.
Absolutely. So we're, as James said, we're not experts in AI, we're educators first. And AI is, of course, taking a large part of kind of the conversation around all areas of life, really. But for us, we're really interested in education and how AI is kind of presenting itself in our classrooms. So first, we thought we'd just go through a kind of a general understanding of what AI is. Most of you probably already know these things, but I think it's a good idea just to go through it a little bit at the beginning here, so we're all starting from the same page. So AI is technology that can mimic human-like problem solving and decision making. It can't sort of think for itself or understand things like humans. It's more that it's putting together research that it's done on pre-existing text from the internet. It's found in all sorts of places, and I'm sure you all will have noticed everything you seem to use has incorporated AI in some way. Like it's a big new feature that whatever software you're using has started to incorporate. So it's kind of in everything at the moment, it feels like. Of course, the most popular and well-known one is ChatGPT. There's also DeepSeek. It's in Siri now. So all of our kind of Apple products have it bedded in with Apple Intelligence, and they also are connected with ChatGPT as well. It's in word processing, things like Grammarly, and Google's Gemini is also found in Google Docs. So it's kind of actively trying to involve itself in your own writing. Also, image recognition software and video, and any kind of recommendation system that we have access to that uses AI to kind of suggest what it thinks you will probably like to see next. So Netflix, YouTube, Instagram, all of these things are based around an intelligence that shows you things that you would like, it thinks you would like to see. And often it's scarily accurate. The thing to always remember throughout this presentation is AI is based on text that's pre-existing online. So it's not creating new knowledge. It's showing you things that existed before. We're today talking mostly about large language models, LLMs. The most well-known example of this is ChatGPT, which is a type of AI. So these are trained on massive amounts of pre-existing text, and it took ChatGPT quite a few years to kind of get through all of its research. So a few years ago, it was kind of, it only knew things up to a certain date, and now it's really quite up to date. It can assist with all sorts of different tasks, and I'm sure we've all kind of had a go using it. It's very good at summarizing texts, editing texts. It can help with brainstorming. It can improve clarity. It can make things kind of error-free. And the reason that we're particularly interested in LLMs is that those skills that it's very good at are pretty much exactly what we're trying to get students to become very good at independently without the support of AI. So we need to be very aware that AI is very strong in a lot of things that we want the students to become very strong in. So it's about trying to make sure that we get those students mastering those skills without kind of turning to AI before they've managed to do that. Always worth remembering that these large language models lack judgment. They don't have kind of an independent viewpoint. They don't really understand what it is that they're showing you. Then it's more based around patterns, and it is very good at guessing what it's supposed to be telling you, and it's incredibly accurate most of the time. But it doesn't really understand what it's showing you. and it finds it difficult to be very creative because it's using pre-existing knowledge that was already on the internet. So it's not producing something completely unique for you. It's more that it's put together text in a way that might not have been done before. It's not that it's coming up with its own creative ideas.
Yeah, so I think anyone who's used ChatGPT especially will be aware that it's very capable at certain of doing certain tasks. Those tasks are usually around generating content. So in terms of more general uses that are not as specific to education, we find that ChatGPT can be used to summarize texts. We obviously ChatGPT being the main one that we would use for this, that people use for this. It's also very good at writing and producing simple texts, so that might be emails or short passages. Um, you might find it being used a lot in customer service chatbots, so a lot of automated responses you get from businesses, especially on business websites, might incorporate ChatGPT. And in the workplace, it's being introduced to automate certain tasks, especially tasks that are repetitive, in order to improve efficiency. Now, as Gareth mentioned, you'll see that writing and producing text is a lot of what we do and a lot of what students do, which makes it especially concerning in the realm of education. Now, when it comes to AI as a learning tool, I think we all share the view that AI should be there to enhance, but not replace any form of learning. So I guess there's a bit of a shared philosophy at Little Mountain. We want to encourage students to use AI as a personalized and efficient research tool and even a learning aid, and it should never be there to replace their own original work. That being said, this is a tool that we use very, very rarely in any classroom situation, and we'll talk about that a little later. But I like to see it as being a way of helping students get unstuck if they're working on their own. So if you've got a student working independently, this can be a great tool for them. No student has got a teacher or a tutor available 24/7. So this can be seen as a fantastic tool to help students in certain situations and in certain ways. Now, when it comes to using AI in education, I think there are some good use cases, but also some harmful use cases as well. And I think it often comes down to the nuanced ways that students use AI themselves. So when we think about using AI in academics, there can be certain benefits, and we can talk about a few of those benefits now. So first of all, students who are struggling to understand a concept. For example, a student might have learned about cliffhangers in narrative writing, but they're struggling to understand the concept of it. So a useful prompt to ask ChatGPT might be explain what a cliffhanger is in simple terms. If they are not in a classroom setting and they're working independently, then it can be great to have that concept explained to them, a concept that otherwise they might have not understood. And this is kind of where I come back to helping a student get unstuck. I feel like if a student were to be stuck at this first hurdle of understanding this new concept, they won't be getting much further in the task that they're given. So getting unstuck by asking for an explanation of this concept is a very helpful way of using AI. A more harmful way of using AI in the same situation might be to say, write me a narrative prompt ending with a cliffhanger, or write me a narrative piece of writing even ending in a cliffhanger. This is doing all of the learning that the child should be experiencing for them, and they're not really benefiting at all from that learning process. Now, we might also think about how AI can be used when it comes to grammar and writing and supporting children in both of these processes. It can be a useful tool to check grammar, and it can be a useful tool to ask questions and ask for improvements for. You might use a prompt like this: check my sentence structure for mistakes and offer suggestions and explanations why. You would get a response to this that could be quite helpful. Maybe you've got a run-on sentence, maybe your sentence structure doesn't quite work, you've used the wrong punctuation. AI could be used to get some feedback on this, and then you can make your own improvements independently. The problem really comes when a student might use a prompt like, read my paragraph and replace all grammar mistakes. Again, the learning process is completely being taken away from the student, and it's basically the task has been given to the AI. And it's that checking and that improving that we really want the student to do themselves. So if that opportunity is taken away from them, then they are missing out on some crucial learning when it comes to grammar and writing. Now, another really helpful use case for AI is self-quizzing and practice. So you might find that a student is revising a set of words, uh, and they don't have a tutor to revise with. They're not in an in-class setting at the time. So one great way of using AI in this case is to ask for it to create a test for them. So test me on grade 5 vocabulary words, for example. Now, this would give them maybe multiple choice questions or questions where they have to try and understand the meaning of these new words or explain the meanings of these new words. And they can do that on their own without a tutor. And I think that is really, really valuable. And I think this is a very good case of how AI can help students with their independent learning. And then finally, it can be really useful for homework clarification as well. Both Gareth and I, I'm sure we've both encountered students who write their homework down, everything's fine, they go home, don't remember what the task was, and come back the next week and weren't able to do the homework because, well, they forgot the homework or they misunderstood something, and it was too late when they got home to answer the question. So I think having ChatGPT there to clarify what a question means can be a really useful case. And this, again, is an example of AI getting a child unstuck with their homework. Now, a more harmful version of this might be, I don't understand my homework, answer my homework for me as if you are a grade 6 student. So telling the AI to write the answers to that homework. And, the explanation there is quite obvious. The AI is doing the homework for them and they are not benefiting at all from that. So I think what we can take away from this is that AI can be used in an educational setting, but it very much depends on how the student is using it and making sure that they're not using it in a way that takes that learning opportunity away from them.
Okay, so I'm now going to talk a little bit about Bloom's taxonomy. So this is something that many of you will have seen before, but also maybe not. So James and I probably are the same in that likely on the first day of our teacher training all of those years ago, they put this pyramid up. And it's something that we see all the time as teachers because it is a way of kind of underpinning the understanding of how you want children to think and learn. So I'm just going to talk through this a little bit, not in a great deal of detail, but I would say looking up Bloom's taxonomy afterwards is very interesting because it's something that is really crucial to understanding how children learn, and the different kind of levels of thinking that they go through. So it starts down at the bottom, and effectively each layer of this pyramid is a different skill, and they get increasingly more difficult as it goes up. So down at the bottom are lower order thinking skills. That means they're kind of easier and it requires kind of less effort for the person that is doing their learning in this zone. So we start with remembering, which is effectively recalling facts, recalling information. And then we move up to understanding, which means really understanding what it is that you're learning. So having a much greater kind of ability to explain ideas that you have been exploring. If you can explain something to somebody else, it's a much better, it's a good sign that you really understand it yourself. Something you've probably heard before is you really can prove you know something if you can teach somebody else it. Then we move up to applying, which is where you use this information in lots of different ways. So applying might be using some information that you have really understood in like an extended piece of writing, for example. Analyzing means really being able to pull apart the topic or the novel or whatever it is that you're focusing on, and start to be able to link elements of whatever it is you're working on to other experiences you've had. So maybe you're reading a novel and in some way you relate to the main character because they're going through some kind of situation that makes you that you kind of recall, oh, that reminds me of a time when and that is kind of a good example of analyzing a situation or a character and then connecting it in some way to yourself. We have evaluating, which means really being able to examine information and determine how trustworthy it is, how useful it is, how far it moves your kind of claims in your writing forward. That's a very high order thinking skill because you have to really understand everything that's come before in order to understand whether or not your piece of writing, for example, is successful. And then finally, if you can bring all of those thinking skills together, the most challenging thing to do is to create. So to use all of this to produce something completely unique that other people can access, that adds something new to the world, that develops new ideas in some way. And in order to reach that top skill, you really have to have mastered everything else. Now, what I have here on the right-hand side is we've kind of broken down the writing process. So whenever we set, for example, an essay to be written by one of our students, there's actually a lot of different steps that are involved in producing that piece of writing. So first of all, they have to really understand and kind of define the question that's being asked of them. So do they thoroughly understand what it is that they're being asked to kind of respond to? Then there will be the brainstorming stage. This is where they kind of get all of their ideas down on paper or wherever they like to do it, and start to really organize all of that. This is quite a messy stage because you might have loads of thoughts, and then you might need to kind of pick out the ones that actually really stick to your topic, push your point forward, and will make it into the final piece of writing. I mean, you can see, for example, this brainstorming element of kind of planning an extended piece of writing. This is directly involved in evaluating. You need to see whether or not your ideas, you need to evaluate whether or not they're actually going to be valuable in the end. Then we, of course, need to do research. So rather than just, I mean, something that younger students do is they will write an essay and just tell you what they think. That's great. But even better if you can point to some evidence. What made you think that? Have you got any trustworthy sources that you can refer to show that you really understand the topic that you're talking about, that you've really done some work to understand kind of what other conversations have been had around this topic? That will all come from research. And again, that's about analyzing. So can you analyze what's useful? Can you evaluate um, you know, what these sources are saying, and can you decide whether or not they're going to be useful to apply in your own piece of writing? Then you're going to write your first draft. Once you've got all the planning done, all the research done, you really understand what you want to say, you're going to write the first draft, for example, of a 5-paragraph essay. This is probably a time when you're creating something new. You're bringing lots of things together and creating a piece of writing. That's great. Then we move on to doing some revising. This is where you check to see whether your essay is clear to the reader. Does it follow the structure that you've been taught? Does it follow a structure that any reader could understand so that it flows really well? And does all of your content really push your point forward in a convincing way? Again, this is probably a lot to do with evaluating. You're analyzing your own work. Then we do some editing. This is checking for mistakes, spelling, grammar, punctuation. This is just to make sure that everything is kind of accurate in terms of foundational English skills. And then finally, the last stage is to publish it as a final draft. So again, this is incorporating all of these steps and then you've created something new. And as you can kind of see, we've gone way beyond just recalling simple facts. So recalling facts is something that's not very difficult. So that's kind of the lowest stage of this process. But when you're writing, learning how to write a really meaningful and purposeful piece of work, you're going to have to work through all of these elements of learning and thinking in order to do that. So the question then is, what about AI, and how does that kind of impact students' ability to kind of reach all of these things? So I think James is going to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so if we then summarize everything we've learned about AI's role in the learning process, we can see that it can assist with lower order thinking skills, and it can be a useful tool just as the internet can be in general to assist with those lower order thinking skills. But beyond that, all of these higher order thinking skills that Gareth discussed, these are essential for students. These are essential skills that students need to learn. And if they are using AI in multiple different processes of the learning process, multiple different stages, then they lose out on all of those higher order skills, and they will not develop all of those higher order skills. These are the skills that form the most impactful elements of the learning journey. So if they take those opportunities away from them, and if they give them all to the AI, they're missing out on a massive amount of learning. And that's where we see if the over-reliance on AI is taking away those opportunities for students to master these stages. So for that reason, we do not really use AI in the classroom at all, and we would rather students have those opportunities themselves. If we think about general critical thinking skills, we can't afford to be not developing those. So in the classroom, we focus on specific skills that are not cannot be replaced by AI, basically. And the skills that we learn in the classroom, they come from the teacher feedback cycle. So submitting work, getting feedback from teacher, maybe in the form of homework, or even in the form of live classes, writing sentences together, restructuring sentences together. They also come in the form of discussions. The discussions that we have in class are so valuable, and especially now when students spend so much of their time working online or doing whatever it may be online, these human discussions are very, very valuable. And then, of course, the human revisions as well. When we're working in the classroom together, both teachers and students are working together to revise their work. There is a process of discussion there, and they come to an agreement on what changes should be made. And students have a lot of input in that stage there. So they are, instead of outsourcing that work to the AI like they may otherwise do, they play a huge role in the process of revising their own work. And it's during that stage that they really learn a lot.
Okay, so I'm going to talk through a study so I went to a Languages Canada conference last year, and there was a very interesting study that was done on the use of ChatGPT in the classroom. Now, I'm going to talk you through it because I thought that the results were quite interesting, actually. So, first, I'll kind of set up where it was and sort of what the study was. So, it was at the University of Canada West. So, it's important to remember that these are university students we're talking about. So, they all had the same essay question, and there were four groups of six students. And they were all tasked to write an essay using the same question. And then once they were all finished, those essays were randomized and assessed by the students out of 100 using the same kind of grading rubrics. So these four groups, one of the groups was not allowed to use ChatGPT at all. The second group were allowed to use ChatGPT for every step of the writing process. That writing process that I just kind of took you through. They could use it for the whole thing. The third group were allowed to use it before they do the first draft, and then they weren't allowed to use it again. So they could use it for help with coming up with ideas, planning where their ideas are going to go, organizing the structure of their essay, but then they had to write it themselves. So they would have a plan that was made by ChatGPT, and then they get on with writing their first draft. Then we have the post-writing group. This is for students who were only allowed to use it once they'd done all of those steps themselves, finished writing their essay, and then they were allowed to use it for making corrections. So, for example, grammar, spelling, punctuation, some feedback on their structure, and then they could make little edits to it, but they couldn't do much more than that. Now, I'm going to show you the results of this. So I found it to be quite interesting, but what I will say is that these are university students and they marked the essays themselves out of 100. So the most successful group was the group that could use ChatGPT after they had planned it and written it themselves. The main kind of points there were that the piece of writing was very personal and insightful because it all came from the student themselves. They weren't asking ChatGPT to come up with their ideas for them. They needed to come up with everything themselves. They needed to write it in their own author's voice. So they really had to concentrate on making sure that they were getting their point across how they wanted to, rather than how ChatGPT thinks it should be done. This was well-rounded and they were generally error-free because they had the chance to let ChatGPT give them advice on corrections and also advice on making sure that it was clearly structured and well-rounded. So this was the highest graded group. So the 6 students who were in that group, they wrote the best essays. The second most successful group in terms of grades was the group that was not allowed to use ChatGPT at all. I think what was striking about this is that, again, their writing was very personal. It was original, insightful. You hadn't sort of read it before. Sometimes I think people will recognize what I mean when I say that writing that's been done through ChatGPT sounds a bit ChatGPT. It has kind of its own sort of sound. I know you can ask it to put it in different styles and tones, but generally there's kind of a feeling if something's been written by AI. These essays were completely from the students themselves, which was noticeable when compared to the others. There were some structural issues, maybe because they didn't kind of get any strong feedback on that element from AI as the others did. And then there were also some errors present because there was no, checking it apart from what they would use on normal spell check. So there were still some sort of grammar errors present because ChatGPT did never have the chance to go through it and provide them any feedback. But still, they were second most successful. I don't want to say second best, but these essays were the second most successful. And then the pre-writing group was next. So again, their writing was personal because they had to come up with the idea. They needed to come up with the ideas and they got some help organizing those. It was really well structured, but some errors were present because they, again, couldn't have ChatGPT look through it. But what I would say, and I think James would probably agree, is little spelling, punctuation errors. That is kind of the least important thing in a way in an extended piece of writing because you really want to hear what the student has to say rather than it being just perfectly spelled and those kind of slightly lower level thinking skills. You really want to see that they're creating something new. And then the final one, which was significantly below all of the other ones, were the people who were able to use it for every single stage. The writing was very bland. It sounded kind of AI-like. It didn't sound like it was original or particularly interesting. It was inaccurate in places in that the AI used sources that don't really exist and it had some hallucinations. So it would say facts that just aren't true. And it would make up some statistics that, again, can't be checked. So it wasn't very trustworthy actually as a piece of work, because some of it just wasn't true. And it didn't really have much new insight or analysis because, as we sort of have said, ChatGPT isn't very good at making independent opinions on something. So if it's trying to sort of persuade you in a certain way, or if it's trying to push its point forward, it doesn't feel passionately about it. So it's much more difficult to get it to write a piece of work that feels passionately about its subject because it doesn't really know what it's saying. Whereas the students who are writing their own work, you can sense that they have an interest and a passion for that, for whatever it is they're writing about. So this is very interesting in that ChatGPT can be really useful, of course, but let's not forget that not using ChatGPT actually ended up being really successful too. So it's not a case, according to this study, of if you're not using ChatGPT, you're not going to be doing as well as the next person, because that's not always necessarily the case. It's all about how you use it and how you ensure that your voice is still coming through and that you're still able to show that you've mastered those Bloom's taxonomy higher order thinking skills, because those are the ones that really produce great writing. I just want to note that this is for university students. So the hope is that they have actually already mastered these higher order thinking skills. The students here at Little Mountain, we're teaching them these skills and they're practicing these skills and trying to master them now. That's the stage they're at in their learning journey. So when I'm talking about these essays being kind of proof that ChatGPT is a good thing, these students have already mastered this taxonomy. So we're still building those skills with Little Mountain students. That's why we don't rely on it very much, because we don't want to take any opportunity away from them when they could be independently mastering those higher order thinking skills themselves.
So it's a really interesting study, and I think when you see the capabilities of AI and you see that it is capable of producing not just helping in all stages of the learning process, but also can be used to produce a whole essay as well, you realize that that must create a lot of problems for teachers and a lot of challenges in the classroom in general. And that's definitely the case. I think teachers around the world have been surprised by the capabilities of AI, and maybe some feel a bit lost about what to do, but I think that it comes with a certain set of challenges. One of those would be students gradually becoming over-reliant on AI. So you might find over time, as students use AI more and more for their work, or even assisting with their work, they become very dependent on that, and it reduces their independent thinking. And I think the more students start to use AI inappropriately, the more they think that it can just replace all of the tasks that they could be doing for homework. So they might start to see those homework tasks as redundant because, well, the AI can just do this for me. Why would I be researching this topic, or why would I be writing this paragraph? But of course, as we've stated multiple times already, when you reduce that independent thinking, you take away those higher order skills that students should be learning, and you really remove all of those learning opportunities. But over-reliance on AI is definitely a concern for teachers. Now, another challenge is the lack of critical thinking that students will develop. So when even just reading AI-generated content, we know that it's quite bland and sounds quite samey, and it kind of discourages deeper analysis. It doesn't really contain any personal elements or any quite thoughtful, thought-provoking elements that would encourage critical thinking. So if we find that students are relying more and more on AI, it could diminish these critical thinking skills. Now, a huge one that I think is probably the biggest worry for teachers, and it's certainly something that both Gareth and I have encountered increasingly over the months as ChatGPT has become more popular, but students trying to submit AI-generated work as their own is a huge challenge. And it does happen. It does happen sometimes. But I think, as we'll touch on later, teachers have their own ways of dealing with this. And then finally, children developing a blind trust in AI responses is another challenge. I think when all students read about is how amazing AI is and how it's going to be the future and it's taking over everything, you maybe can excuse them for thinking that has got all of the answers. But obviously, as anyone who's used it knows, that's not the case. And it does make lots of mistakes. It does provide misinformation. And it can be quite confusing how it makes such simple mistakes. But I don't think children who engage with ChatGPT really recognize that or notice it. I think that they're not capable of questioning what they receive back from it because, well, why would it not be true? So there are definitely a lot of challenges from AI in the classroom. However, that being said, hopefully it will fill parents with a bit of confidence knowing that these challenges are not necessarily all new. I would say that teachers have been facing challenges like this for years and years. Maybe 20 years ago, we were warning children about copying from the person next to you. If you're copying from the person next to you, you're not learning yourself and you're copying their mistakes as well. If we fast forward 10 years ago, maybe to the early 2000s, students were getting all of their work from the internet and they were copying from the internet. And they, instead of writing a certain paragraph or answering questions, they might just Google the answers, copy it into a Word document and submit that. And if we fast forward to today, students are finding other ways of cheating or submitting work that is not their own or being academically dishonest, and they're doing it with ChatGPT. And yes, it's a lot more efficient. Yes, it can be maybe easier to use for them, and it can be harder for teachers to identify. But I don't think any of the challenges are necessarily brand new for teachers. I guess I say that coming from more of a writing position. I think that's not necessarily true for all subjects. I'm sure there are some subjects where ChatGPT is a brand new problem. But I think where submitting writing is concerned, this is a problem that teachers have faced for a long time. And teaching pre-ChatGPT, I've had very similar conversations with students about how if they're just submitting work from the internet that they copied from the internet, they are not learning at all. And then, fast forward to now, I've had that same conversation as well, but with ChatGPT. So I think that knowing that teachers are fairly prepared for some of these challenges and have faced them before in the past in different ways, would hopefully be a bit reassuring.
Okay, so let's have a look at some examples of how AI can be used incorrectly. And we will also talk about how we can kind of recognize that. So, for example, a student might submit a piece of writing that's been generated by AI. And usually we can tell this because the style of writing doesn't really match with what we know from the student. So, what we will notice is that as we're in small groups, we've got maximum of 6 students. We really get to know each student's writing style. And usually we can tell who wrote a piece of writing without their name being on it because you can just sense whose it is because you kind of get to know how they sound in their writing. If it doesn't match that or it's significantly departed from that, we kind of might start to suspect that it wasn't entirely their own. Maybe a student uses AI to answer comprehension questions without reading the novel or without reading the text. This could be quite hard for us to tell because maybe it's a question that actually there's a right or wrong answer. That's why we try to have open-ended questions that include some kind of personal reflection from the student so that we can really talk to them about, okay, what made you feel that way? And it's interesting to see how well they can kind of talk through what their answers were. As I say, personal reflection answers. AI is not going to be very good at doing that. So it's really useful for us to be able to talk to that student about what they're feeling about certain topics or books or whatever it is, because we know each response is going to be unique to that student. There might be an essay that includes AI generated sources that don't exist. As I mentioned about the study, these are called hallucinations in some, I think we all call them hallucinations, where AI kind of comes up with something that isn't actually true. So if an essay has examples of that, then we'd be that would be an example of AI being misused. So detecting it, as I said, we can tell if a student is it's not really their own writing because we just know they're writing so well. Maybe the vocabulary is of a higher level than we would come to expect. Maybe the tone's not quite the same as what we're used to from that student. We actually find that element quite easy, but we can't ever really be certain. So we can't go around accusing everybody. But we can use some ChatGPT kind of detectors. One is called Zero GPT. Again, these can't always be completely trusted, but they do help us to have kind of more confidence in our feeling that something might not be completely the student's own. So this is what it looks like as an example. If I put in a piece of writing that I received from a student that I maybe suspect has some kind of AI in there, I'll put it into here. And as you can see, it says it's nearly 90% AI produced. So this makes me feel confident that something's not quite right with this piece of writing. And that would lead us to have, discussions with the students about the point of our classes together, what, the impact that farming out this stuff to AI can do for their kind of long-term goals of achieving those higher order thinking skills, the importance of being original, reminding them of the learning process and not trying to take too many shortcuts, particularly shortcuts around really important learning stages. And integrity, I don't want to just read a ChatGPT produced essay. I could do that myself. So it's kind of about that relationship with the teacher and the student where I'm putting in a lot of effort to try and bring you value. And I would like us both to have the same kind of respect for one another in terms of, I want to see what you can do. Then I know how I can help you move on to the next stage. So it's kind of a two-way street, and explaining that to the students is really meaningful because, as I said, we have small classes, we build relationships with our students, and this is kind of part of the point of our classes with one another.
So a very big concern of parents that we've heard a lot of is how do we encourage students to think critically when there is AI all around them and they could just rely on AI to do so many tasks. And there are quite a few ways that we encourage our students to think critically in the classroom. And one of those ways is by providing writing tasks that are personal. They require reflection and they require unique responses that cannot be generated by AI. So one example might be in our weekly journal writing. These prompts are always opinion-based or perspective-based or thought-based, trying to argue a specific point based on your own experiences and your own evidence. This is not something that students would use AI to generate, and it's a very, very useful task for them to think critically. Now, another thing we do in pretty much every class, bar just a few maybe in the novel studies, is we teach students to analyze what makes good writing. And we do that by working backwards from some strong examples. So in a class setting, we would share a strong paragraph or a strong example essay, and we would really analyze that in detail. So we would pick out the techniques the writer has used and what impact those techniques might have on the writer. We look at the structural techniques the writer has used and we discuss whether it was effective or not. And a lot of students actually critique the writing, which is really helpful, and it shows that they are thinking very critically about it and they're not just accepting what they are reading at face value, which is fantastic. And I think this is a really great task because students learn themselves what a good piece of writing contains and what it shouldn't contain. And by doing this week in, week out, they become extremely critical. Now, we also focus on critical thinking while we're doing our novel studies instead of just simple comprehension. So yes, we do comprehension questions just to make sure that students are following along with the novel and can understand what they're reading. But we also like to make sure that students are making personal connections to the novel and looking at maybe connections to characters or connections to themes that they see in the novel. And finally, we collaborate a lot with our students in the classroom. So we work together. We might be redrafting sentences together. We might be discussing and questioning each other's work. And we have that between students as well, which is a really effective use of time in the classroom. So why do we still need to do classroom learning when so many resources are available online and when students can learn so much from AI? Why are physical or online classes so valuable? Well, first of all, the balanced development, I think, is something that we just don't get from spending all our time learning online. We, yes, focus on academic growth, but emotional intelligence and empathy and self-regulation, these are really important skills. The interpersonal skills between students, we also value a lot as well. We also try to do a lot of collaborative thinking, so get our students to discuss with each other and with the teacher. This gets them a lot better at articulating their own ideas, again, something that isn't possible through AI. We do a lot of our work together. We try to strengthen the teamwork skills of students. We make them adaptable to work in different group sizes and with different people who they might not necessarily share the same views as, but they can still work together on certain skills and develop their active listening skills. And then finally, one of the, I think, most valuable parts of our lessons is the building up their confidence. They present work weekly. Now, that might not be in a strictly presentation setting where they're presenting a piece of work or presenting a project, but they share their ideas in front of a small group. These are very small classes. Students build a lot of confidence working in the same group week in, week out, and they develop all of these public speaking skills. They become much more persuasive and much more clear. And I think that's a really valuable part of the physical and online classes.
Okay, so we're just going to talk through a little bit about how you can help your child use AI responsibly at home, maybe some small tips. So, first of all, we try to tell parents not to kind of avoid the subject entirely and allow it to become a taboo subject, one you should not talk about. It's best to kind of talk through how do you use AI? How do you find it useful? Talk through maybe some of its limitations, um, because it's best to kind of be, we're all kind of learning about AI as we move forward in our lives. And I think it's one of those things with children that they kind of need a bit of help and guidance walking through it as well, you know, rather than them sort of working out on their own and maybe ending up misusing it. It's best to kind of talk with them about how it can be used well to support them in their lives. Modeling responsible use. So again, demonstrating that it's a helper rather than something you can completely rely on. And this is one of my favorites, which is to use AI to help engage with your child's learning. So as teachers, we get lots and lots of questions about how parents can help their child at home. All parents want to do that, but sometimes it's quite difficult, especially as children start to get older. So, an example might be if a student is reading a book or doing a novel study at school or at Little Mountain, then, but you haven't read the book, which is completely understandable. It might be a nice idea to ask ChatGPT to give you a summary or give you some talking points to do with that novel, or tell me some of the themes that are in this story so I can talk about them with my child, just so that that's kind of a way to get some access into their learning and into their reading. Same thing about if they come home, tell you what they've been learning today, if they do that. I mean, when my mum asked me what I was learning today, I never told her because I couldn't remember. But they might come home and say, oh, we were learning about this today, and you might not know what it is. It's completely understandable. Sometimes teachers have to teach things that we don't really know that much about, and we have to do some research beforehand. So again, you can look it up, learn a little bit about it yourself, and you can even ask AI to give you some specific tips on how to help in a specific situation. So, how can I help my child learn their 10 spelling words in a more fun way? And it will give you some tips. Or you know, can you make me a little quiz I can say to my child on the way to school or something like that, just to give you some ideas of how to kind of use AI to kind of open the door on what they're doing at school. If you kind of feel like I don't really know what they learn about and I don't really understand it myself, it's completely understandable. Also, just be aware not to give it too much significance. James spoke a bit earlier about we don't really use it much in class. I would say it hardly ever comes up in a class conversation. But we need to all be aware of it, and we definitely all need to be aware of the ways that it could harm and also the ways that it can help children's development in education. So I don't want the children to feel, and also people who have come to this conversation today, to feel like AI is so important because we're being taught to about AI all the time. And I don't want the students to feel like it's so important that it's going to take over absolutely everything tomorrow. It's more of a case of, sure, we don't know what it's going to be like in 10 years, but for right now, these are the things we need to uh, develop. These are the thinking skills and learning skills that every person needs to develop. And this is how we do it. And this is how AI can support some of those elements, but certainly not replace them all.
Yeah, so I think those are some really great tips, and I especially think the parents can use AI themselves to catch up with what their students are up to. I think that's a really great use, and yeah, definitely take advantage of it. And now I'm just a bit conscious of the time. I'm aware we've ran over just by a couple of minutes already, but we won't be keeping anyone too much longer. I just had a question from the survey that we sent out that I thought was really interesting. Somebody asked, are the AI tools available for use in school, and to what extent will students be able to use these apps or tools in the classroom? And I thought that was a really great question. Now, I can't necessarily speak for all classrooms or even classes in day schools, but I can speak for in my classroom. And we, as Gareth just mentioned, it very rarely comes up. At the beginning, students might have been asking a little bit about it and seeing how what they can get away with, and they if they saw us opening it to do something with them, they thought it was a bit of a taboo, which I think is a really interesting idea, and they've maybe been taught never use it. Um, but as I said, we do use it occasionally, and I can think of just a couple of instances. One is with prompt generation. Uh, I find that ChatGPT is really useful for helping students who are stuck with a writing task. For example, a student wants to write a persuasive writing essay, and I like to give students the freedom to choose their own topics generally, as long as they're sensible. I realize that a generic prompt isn't always perfect for everyone. So I think students using their own prompts is fantastic. But finding a prompt can be really challenging. It can take a lot of time scouring different websites, and if a student doesn't know what they're interested in necessarily, or they're just not searching that, they might get just tons and tons of ideas that aren't relevant to them. So I've used in a couple of occasions, I've used ChatGPT to help a student generate their own persuasive writing prompt or any other mode of discourse for that matter. So having a student creating a prompt that tells ChatGPT what they're interested in, maybe their hobbies or their passions, or some topic that they find interesting, maybe a historical event, and asking for prompts that are appropriate for this grade age. So I'm a grade 8 student. I'm really interested in the Second World War. Could you recommend some persuasive writing prompts for me to write an essay about? And I think that's something I've used a few times, and I found it's been extremely successful. And students can then take some ideas from one prompt and combine it with another one. So that's a really good use case of how we've used ChatGPT in the classroom. And another is for simple topic research. Just the other day, we were looking at some context, some background information on the novel The Outsiders. And we did a little task where students were researching one group, and some students were researching another group of students. So there was the socks and the greasers, and they would both spend 5 minutes researching and then share with each other so that everyone had a good understanding of the context of the novel. And I thought ChatGPT was a good way of doing that. Instead of using Google, which might be less efficient use of class time, we could use ChatGPT to ask some specific prompts, find out some useful information, and share that information with the other students. But those are the times I can think of. Can you think of any of the
No,
cases you used,
I think
ChatGPT?
that's really, really useful.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. Making sure, because as James said about we have prompts, of course, for all of the students to use, but actually as they grow older and more independent, we actually really want them to be choosing their own. And that part of the writing process that we mentioned earlier about defining the question, understanding and defining the question, when they start to define their own questions, that they're going to use for an extended piece of writing, that's a really good sign that they're very engaged. They have some kind of passion that they would like to write about. And that's when you're going to get the best pieces of writing from them. So if ChatGPT can help to kind of come up with a question that's going to really help them shine, that's fantastic. But that's kind of where we want the use of it in that situation at our stage of teaching them to master these skills. That's kind of where we want ChatGPT to kind of stop in our classrooms. So once they've kind of got that, we sort of leave ChatGPT there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another question I saw was, should we encourage children to use ChatGPT for schoolwork? I think we've kind of addressed that. I would say not necessarily, apart from some very specific use cases. What do you think there?
I think that's right. What you spoke about earlier was very useful, and it's quite important how you use it, what kinds of questions you ask it. So if you're just getting it to answer things for you, that's not very useful, and I wouldn't recommend it. And we can't really trust children, unfortunately. And I'm the same. When you ask it, can you check this for mistakes? The children aren't necessarily going to look through each mistake and say, oh, I see what I did wrong. Great. They're just going to say, can you, it's unfair to say they, I mean, some of them may be likely to just say, can you correct this for me? And then it just gives them back a perfect version and they've learned nothing. Because if they were taught, these are the grammar errors you made, this is how you can correct them, then you try and correct them yourself. Ask it, did I correct them properly? That way you're actually kind of learning how to identify and self-correct errors. But if you're just asking it to correct it for you and send it back, that's not a good use of time. And I'd much rather see the mistakes version than the perfect version that they got ChatGPT to do, because this way I can see, okay, this is where we're currently at. These are some things I need to work with them on. But if they're just sending perfect pieces of writing because ChatGPT's polished it off for them, that doesn't really help me kind of take them to the next kind of stage of their writing development.
Another interesting question in the chat. What's the grade level that Little Mountain starts incorporating usage of ChatGPT and or starts exposing students to it, whether using it or just general understanding of the tool in the class? For me, I would probably say around grade 5 is when students are aware of it. And I would say that maybe a concern is that students are being shown ChatGPT before they even find out about it themselves. So basically, we're shooting ourselves in the foot and telling students about this great tool that they could be using. But I think that I would say probably around grade 5 students have been curious about what it is and what it can do. But I know that a lot of the younger students I've had to just say, oh, that's that website that's cheating, isn't it? That's that website that you shouldn't use. And I think that, that's probably a more sensible view at that age than saying, wow, that this is the website that does everything for you. So I would say that, yeah, maybe grade 5 is the youngest, but I would also add that none of those students are hearing about it for the first time in our class, basically. I think if I'm ever bringing it up, it's because it's maybe being discussed previously or students have got some prior knowledge of it. And again, if it's being mentioned to students of that age at all, it's for those very specific use cases. So maybe prompt generation, I would say that's probably it. If a student is a bit stuck with a prompt, sure, as students get a little bit older and they've developed some skills themselves, maybe there's different use cases that we can find. But I think when it's that young, it would be very limited. Yeah. Anything to add? Or?
No, I agree with that, and I think that. Yeah, with the younger ones, often it's a case of they've just heard of it but don't really know what it is, which is completely understandable. And we kind of would like so we kind of take it with the individual students. If we know we have a student who's very is kind of mature and able to understand that it's okay for kind of supporting you in certain ways, but actually if they're an independent learner and have, the kind of maturity to understand that they're trying to learn how to do things for themselves, so they're not reliant on anything else, that's a really powerful position to be in. So if you start to rely on ChatGPT too young, I feel like you're kind of accidentally giving away some of that power of learning all of these skills so that you have it within yourself forever.
Mhm.
You're kind of losing the opportunity to do that. So we don't want to bring it up all the time or start actively teaching them how to use it, unless we really feel like it's going to be of benefit and really feel like the student that we're talking to about it is really going to be able to take in what it all means. So I wouldn't have a group of grade fours all typing away on ChatGPT and seeing what it can do, because that's not really what our classes are for. Our classes for all of that rich learning that James has been talking about.
Yeah.
So kind of as we said, we don't use it very often. And when we do, it's very targeted to make sure that it's for the right students for the right reasons.
Fantastic. All right, so we'll leave the questions there, but if anything does come up at a later time, please don't hesitate to get in touch with
Mhm.
Gareth or I or any of the counselors. So we've talked about quite a lot today, so we'll just try and recap everything that we've discussed so you've got some takeaways from this workshop. So it's really clear that AI is a very powerful tool, and it can be used in a good way, especially when students are working independently when it is used responsibly. But there is no hiding the fact that students still have to think critically. They need to fact check, and they should be seeing AI as a way of enhancing their learning instead of replacing it. And that's the view that all of the teachers have at Little Mountain. Now, AI is a very new tool. I guess just like the internet revolution was as well, it's changing how we learn, but those core skills, the reading, writing, the critical thinking skills, and the research skills that we've discussed today, they are all still essential. So again, use AI to support them, never use it to replace them. Now, when it comes to parents' role, I do think parents play a really key role in guiding AI use, especially because, us as teachers can only be with students for a certain amount of time a day, spend a lot of time with parents at home. And I think that parents can help students by discussing AI, setting boundaries, showing that people do use it. People are using it in their work life. It's only natural that students will look for a way to use it in their school life as well, but show them the boundaries, show them where they can use it and where they really should avoid using it, and encourage them to be responsible. Um, Children are always going to go behind parents' backs to do things if they think they're not allowed. So I think it's much safer to show them how to use it safely and show, look, this is how I use it, and this is how you could use it in education, and make sure they don't overstep the mark. And then finally, who knows what is going to happen with AI? I'm sure the AI that we have now is going to look extremely different in 10 years, in 20 years. We have no idea what is going to happen. But what we're trying to do on a day-to-day basis is teach students to be adaptable, teach students how to live in the world that we find ourselves now, show them how to use it responsibly, keep those critical thinking skills, and hopefully we'll be equipping students for lifelong learning, no matter what happens and how the world changes in years to come. So those are kind of the key summaries from today's workshop.
Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight to talk about AI. I hope you found it useful. And as James said, you can always contact us for further information about any of this or anything else that has come up in today's conversation. So thank you very much. Here's our information, and you can get in touch with us with any questions or comments or anything you might have. But I think that's all from us. So I just want to say thank you to everybody for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you soon for another workshop together.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you very much.
Great.
Mhm.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.